idea of a sleeper cell entered the American vocabulary, as Americans were confronted with the dilemma of anticipating the action of an enemy whose primary modus vivendi appeared to be stealth, secrecy, and doubleness. An Al-Qaeda training manual allegedly captured in a raid in Manchester, England, and thereafter posted on the Department of Justice website, so we can assume that this was exactly what they found in Manchester, England, describes some of the qualifications necessary for becoming an operative in Al-Qaeda as, quote, keeping secrets and concealing information, and the ability to act, change positions, and conceal oneself. Models mentioned for the Al-Qaeda operative include a German spy and an American colonel whose identity as a Russian spy was not discovered until he was in a car crash and spontaneously started speaking in fluent Russian. The manual also gives this secrecy a religious sanction by quoting some putative sayings from Muhammad. But 9/11 was not the first time that the United States public suspected that enemies were latently dwelling within and covertly engaging in subversive activities. When the Soviet Union exploded a nuclear weapon in 1945, the United States public and government were shocked. The belief became widespread that the speed with which the Soviet Union had created a bomb resulted not just from brilliant engineering, but from espionage. Stories resounded in the press, some of them true, of Soviet spy rings operating in the United States. The age of Mccarthyism in the 1950s was devoted to routing out alleged agents of the Soviet Union who, according to the government, were infiltrating all segments of American society. It will be years before historians identify the exact parallels between the post-9/11 period and the age of McCarthy, but the Bush administration openly courted the comparison and analogized Islamic radicalism to communism. And Bush, in his 2005 Tobyhanna Veterans Day speech, explicitly compared communism to Islamic radicalism on the basis of its elitism and its bloodthirsty willingness to sacrifice innocent life. In order to combat the communist threat, the CIA began to study psychological techniques to produce psychological derangement in order to emulate Soviet and Chinese communists, and in 1963 codified a set of extreme interrogation techniques in a manual only declassified in 1977 called the Kubrick Manual. The Kubrick Manual appears to be the origin of many of the techniques of detention, drugging, and sensory deprivation at the core of the enhanced interrogation regime used on suspected Islamic terrorists. In Guantanamo Bay, such terrorists were subjected to techniques previously reserved for Soviet spies. Yet those techniques were also adapted to reflect a belief that it was not just necessary to break the will of a detained terrorist, it was necessary to break the faith as well. The US military and the CIA, presumably the CIA, we have less information about that, incorporated religion and culture into the Kubrick Manual's repertoire of mind-destroying techniques in order to extract information from Guantanamo detainees in Guantanamo. Some of the forms of overt religious abuse included the following: the ridiculing of the call to prayer, the forcible shaving of beards as punishment, use of sexual enticement during interrogations, derision of the prophet, withholding of food during the fast and the breaking of the fast in Ramadan, the prohibition of Quranic recitation, and derision of Islamic rituals and supplication. Degradation of the Quran and its use around toilets, latrines, and buckets used for defecation. One of the criteria used in deciding whether a detainee was too dangerous to release was whether he prayed in his cell. As one lawyer put it, you pray, you stay. Religion was also systematized into the disciplinary system when a prisoner was reclassified as a less cooperative prisoner. He was religious items, religious comfort items were taken away. So beads would be taken away, or a prayer rug, or other articles. The more uncooperative you were, the more you were punished by not being able to practice your religion. These cultural templates of Pearl Harbor and the Cold War combined to create the use of religion, in Sahar Aziz's words, as a proxy for terrorist activity. The more outwardly pious and religious a Muslim appears, the more likely he or she is to commit a terrorist act or engage in terrorist conspiracies in the United States counterterrorism view. Arab Muslim Americans are visually different enough to be cabined as a group, yet Americanized enough to blend in and threaten America as a mole boring from within. And in an effort to prevent terrorist threats from emerging even before they are conceived, U.S. counterterrorism have looked at religiosity as an indicator of likely terrorist activity. The third aspect of othering, which I'm just going to touch on briefly here because I know I'm running out of time, is that of essentializing, and I'll just refer to the reliance of the U.S. military in the early years of the War on Terror on a book that's pretty infamous called The Arab Mind, and is a book that purports to explain how Muslims, Arabs think, and does not really draw meaningful discriminations between different groups of Muslims, between different regional groupings, but that essentializes the cultural group into a monolith of the Arab mind. And this book was used as late as 2006 as a training manual for, as required reading for American soldiers going into the field in the war on terrorism. What can be done? I'm going to conclude with a few suggestions, and I target these suggestions at people like myself who are sympathizers and supporters, because I realize that some of this may already be being done by Arab Americans and Muslim American communities, but there is a need for outsiders who are not part of that community to make more strenuous efforts. The first thing that should be done is to explain and clarify the views on violence in the Quran and in various traditions of Islamic law, in order to dispel the view of Islam as a religion of violence. And I don't mean here just merely asserting that Islam is a religion of peace, but taking, specifically explaining and confronting the references to violence and to war in the Quran, and contextualizing them and giving them a more nuanced understanding. And also publicizing Islam's real historical contribution to the development of international humanitarian law and its early laws designed to cabin or make war more humane. The Bible contains bellicose passages that, when taken out of context, would give the same impression that Christianity is a bloodthirsty religion intent on the utter destruction of its enemies. So this is a burden, I think, that falls on us who are not in the Muslim American communities to make these points clearer. Second, to educate and promote awareness of difference within Muslim and Arab American communities. Americans have a hazy understanding at best of the difference between Sunni and Shiites. I thank Mr. Michaels for the explanation, and of the regional differences, of the large number of Muslims who are not Arab, and of the incredible linguistic variety among dialects and of the Arab language, and the cultural and intellectual richness of the cultural tradition. And third, to collaborate with Muslim American groups, to foster collaborations between Muslim American groups and Christian groups that are designed to educate Christian communities on their own religious history and current developments. The belief that Christianity is not a religion of violence, at least in part, requires the repression of the history of the role of the Catholic Church in promoting the Crusades and in making war on the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The U.S. separation of church and state is in some respect a reaction to the secular ambitions of the Catholic Church and its efforts during the Middle Ages to fuse the temporal and religious centers of authority. So with those suggestions, I'll conclude and turn over the podium to Dalia.